What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Well, guess what happened today, folks? Judge seeks more information from Trump administration about prison deal with El Salvador. Now, when I read that headline, I was like, huh? Like, where does this judge get off thinking he has the authority to press the administration on foreign policy, for crying out loud? He has no authority to ask about that. And as a matter of fact, the administration invoked state secrets. Boom. In your face, my guy. Like, seriously. So, yes, we're on immigration again. Unfortunately, because, you know, it's so fascinating, y'all. It really, really is. The media manipulation on this is really, really fascinating. It really is. And these very people, right, they constantly yelling and screaming about Donald Trump's deportation efforts. And then they'll turn right around and say, well, Donald Trump's mass deportation efforts is an utter failure. Right. A federal judge on Wednesday said he'll order the Trump administration to provide more information about the terms under which dozens of Venezuelan immigrants are being held at a notorious prison in El Salvador, moving a step closer to deciding whether to require the men to be returned to the United States. That whole paragraph is a blatant lie, as a matter of fact, because Donald Trump has not deported any immigrants, let alone Venezuelan immigrants. Guess what? Yes, as a matter of fact, this is the God's honest truth. Donald Trump has not deported a single immigrant out of this country. You know how I know that? Because they're not illegal immigrants. That's why they're not criminal aliens. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, what about all them college students? Well, they're here on a college visa. That's not immigration. They're just here to go to school. They're not immigrating here. Immigrating here would be moving here to live from somewhere else. Right? Right. Those people were not doing that. They were just coming here to go to school. And that's it. That's what those school visas are about. Anyway, District Court Judge James E. Boasberg, our favorite federal judge, said he needed the information to determine whether the roughly 200 men deported in March under an 18th century wartime law were still effectively in U.S. custody. Boasberg noted that President Donald Trump has boasted in an interview that he could get one man wrongly imprisoned in El Salvador in a separate case by simply asking. Go get the guy back. I'm sorry, I must have overlooked that word or something. Once again, folks, he wasn't wrongly deported or imprisoned, by the way, because, you know, in El Salvador, where he is from, it is illegal to be in a gang. And, yeah, he was arrested immediately when we we turned custody control of him over to El Salvador. He was immediately arrested because, yeah, he's a gang member, by the way. You know, the corporate press, they keep trying to deny that by saying there's no proof. Well, you know what, corporate press? Can you prove anybody is in a gang? Prove that the Associated Press is not a gang, by the way. Can you do that? No, you can't do that. So that's how they get away with saying that. Oh, well, it's not proven. Come on. Look at the evidence, but they don't want to look at the evidence because that smashes their narrative. The government's lawyer, Bishop Campbell, said that and other public statements by administration officials about their relationship with El Salvador lacked nuance. Yes, as a matter of fact, they do. Campbell would not give Boasberg any information about the administration's deal with El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, who once called himself the world's coolest dictator and is holding immigrants deported from the U.S. at his country's Seacot prison. That is a lie. He is not holding any immigrants from the U.S. in his prison at all. Those people are not immigrants, by the way. And, you know, you love how they try to poison the well here by adding into that, oh, Nayib Bukele called himself the world's coolest dictator. Oh, what are you trying to say here? What they're trying to do is people that are out of the loop on this and don't understand nuance, once again, don't understand humor whatsoever, don't understand they don't understand a lot of things. will see that and be like, he really called himself a dictator? The coolest dictator? Like, he's still a dictator. They're trying to poison the well. They're burying the lead, too, by the way, because what does any of this have to do with the headline, for crying out loud? What does this have to do with Boasberg? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. But this is another little manipulation aspect. Poisoning the well. Jesus. And burying the lead. Burying the well that's poisoned. That's what they're doing. He would not even confirm the terms of the deal, which the White House has said are a $20 million payment to El Salvador. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Boasberg wants the information to establish whether the administration has what's called constructive custody of the immigrants, meaning it could return them if he ordered it. No, they don't have custody of any immigrants from the United States, as a matter of fact. And no, our administration doesn't have custody of any immigrants from the United States, as a matter of fact. These people are insane, y'all. They really are. Calling these people immigrants. I'm sorry, look, if you come across our southern border illegally, in other words, you circumvent the port of entry and come into this country, you are not an immigrant. That is not immigration. Look up the definition of immigration, by the way. That is not what that is. The ACLU has asked that Boasberg order the return of the men who were accused of being members of a gang Trump claimed was invading the country. What else would you call, being released from a prison in Venezuela and then illegally entering the United States and then commence to committing crimes, taking over apartment complexes, you name it. Just going on about your gang activity. What would you call that, by the way? Yeah, you might not call that an invasion. Not by just, a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000 people. Yeah, that's not really an invasion. What else could you call that, by the way? A gang come in and start taking advantage of our lax police presence in a lot of places. Wonder what that would be called. Oh, a predatory incursion. That would be applicable, wouldn't it? Minutes after Trump unveiled his proclamation in March, claiming wartime powers to short-circuit immigration proceedings and remove the men without court hearings, the immigrants were flown to El Salvador. They're just making stuff up now. There were no immigrants flown to El Salvador. Donald Trump is not trying to short-circuit immigration proceedings because criminal aliens, if that's who they're even talking about, because I imagine that's who they're talking about, because the corporate press does not know the difference between an immigrant and a criminal alien, for crying out loud. But outside of that, what do you mean short circuit the immigrant, official immigrant proceedings or whatever the hell they said? I already forgot because it's so ridiculous. What did they say here? Claiming wartime powers to short-circuit immigration proceedings and remove the men without court hearings. Oh, Lord, hang on. Here we go. I can't stand doing this, but folks, I hope you're still with me because, I've got to knock down this narrative right quick. I've said it before, but now I'm going to go ahead and prove it right quick. So what I did is I went to our digital friend over there at X, Grok, right? It's like ChatGPT, but Grok. Just a little bit different, but you ask him a question, and, for the most part, they'll compile information from the internet and give you that information, right? So, some people say they're biased, some people say they're wrong, but I asked a simple question, and that question is, if I were to cross the border into the U.S. from Mexico and was caught, what would happen? So this is what Grok told me. If you were to cross the U.S.-Mexico border illegally and were caught, the consequences would depend on several factors, including your immigration status, prior encounters with U.S. authorities, and the circumstances of your crossing. Below is a general overview of what could happen based on U.S. immigration laws and enforcement practices. Apprehensions by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Arrest. Oh, if caught crossing the border between official ports of entry, you would likely be apprehended by U.S. Border Patrol agents, part of CBP. You would be taken into custody for processing, initial processing. CBP would collect your biometric data, fingerprints, photographs, verify your identity, and check for prior immigration or criminal records. You would be asked about your reasons for entering the U.S. What is the possible outcomes here? This is where it gets fascinating and very, very damaging for the corporate press. The outcome depends on your situation and U.S. immigration policies at the time. He's totally correct. So far, he's doing a good job, but don't take it from me. Expedited removal. That's the very first one that is brought up. If you are caught near the border within 100 miles or anywhere in the U.S., well, I wonder why they would put within 100 miles or anywhere in the U.S. If you've been in the country for less than 2 years per recent policy expansions, you may be placed in expedited removal proceedings. This means you could be deported quickly without a hearing before an immigration judge. Once again, folks, like I was saying, these people that cross that southern border, they do not get any kind of due process. Well, the due process, once again, is take your fingerprints, figure out who the hell you are, and then boot you the F out of our country. There is no process by which we got to bring all these people to court within 2 years. What is that supposed to mean, by the way, within 2 years? Why should that matter? Now, this is something I think Congress needs to change. I think they should take that stipulation completely out of the equation. Why should that matter if they've been in the country for 2 years or not? That doesn't matter whatsoever. So, once again, though, this comes down to, I think, the Trump administration's argument on this is, okay, hang on just a second. Prove you've been in the country for more than 2 years. That's going to be really hard to do for criminal aliens, considering the facts. But let's keep going and see what else we've got here. You would likely face a 5-year bar or re-entering the U.S. and potentially additional penalties for future illegal entries. Criminal prosecution for illegal entry. Illegal entry is a federal misdemeanor under 8 U.S.C. 1325 for a first offense punishable by up to 6 months in prison and or fine, typically $50 to $250. Sentences are often time served or a few weeks, but you could still face detention. If you have prior illegal entries or other criminal history, you could face felony charges for illegal re-entry under 8 U.S.C. 1326 with penalties including up to 2 years in prison for a second offense, up to 10 to 20 years if you're a criminal, blah, 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 blah. You get the point, don't you? So in other words, if you get labeled as a gang member, yet you don't get no due process. If you just come into this country, you don't get no due process. Your due process, essentially, is taking your fingerprint and booting you the F out of the country. The corporate press is lying to everybody about this. Democrats are lying to everybody about this. Once again, folks, like I was saying, that whole 2-year stipulation, hey, look, I'm calling on the Trump administration right here, right now, to change that stipulation. Like, Congress needs to do something about that because that is an absurdity. Why should time matter at all to the offense of crossing our border illegally? That should not matter a single bit. I would suggest to hurry up and change that. Now, if that is the reason all these Democrats and Republicans and pretty much everybody in existence says that our immigration system is broken, then yes, that is a broken bit to our system because time should not matter whatsoever. If you entered our country illegally, you broke our laws. It's still a criminal offense. They say it's a civil infraction. I'm sorry. This whole situation is absurd, in my opinion. That's ridiculous, y'all. That happened despite Boasberg's ruling that the planes needed to be turned around until he could rule on the legality of the move, and he is separately examining whether to hold the government in contempt for that action. After the March flight, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that no one could be deported under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 without a chance to challenge it in court. Yes, That's right. Yeah, they ridiculously said he could use it, but they have to challenge it. You like how the corporate press framed that, though? They said he couldn't use it. That's a lie, by the way, without the chance. Then they got to caveat that, so if you have to caveat anything at all, pretty much what you just said before that was untrue. Fascinating. Since then, 3 separate federal judges have ruled that Trump's invocation of the act was illegal because the gang he named is not actually at war with the U.S. Do you think that matters? Like, that once again, folks, these people don't read past their own freaking nose. Read the Constitution, people. Jesus Christ. It says predatory incursion. What do you think a criminal gang coming into this country, taking over apartment complexes and committing crimes is doing? They're preying on American citizens, and they have incurred into our sovereignty, for crying out loud. What else do you call that, people? Once again, insanity, I would say. It's likely that those rulings will be appealed all the way back up to the Supreme Court. That is right. They sure will. Campbell on Wednesday acknowledged that the men deported on the March flights did not get the chance to contest their designation under the Alien Enemies Act, or AEA, which is the same thing, as the High Court requires. Now, what that is leaving out, that is heavy, heavy manipulation right there. What is that? That would make you think, sorry for the slip-ups, that would make you think that, oh, the Trump administration violated Supreme Court orders. Because, once again, they just told you that the Supreme Court said, oh, he can't use this. And then he used it, didn't he? But what they failed to tell you is those flights left before those orders came down. They left, as a matter of fact, before any litigation came down the pipelines. Right? That's what they're talking about. As those last few flights were in the air over international waters, this local district federal judge tried to stop these planes, tried to force them to turn around when he has absolutely no authority to do so. So all this happened before that, but the corporate press is not going to tell you that. They're going to try to lull you into this sense that Donald Trump is violating Supreme Court orders over here. Then they're by blatantly lying about everything. They have to, if they have to lie about anything, that's a hole in their narrative. That is a hole in their logic. And at this point, considering just about every sentence has had some kind of hole in their logic, what does that tell you, folks? There's almost no substance to their logic whatsoever. There's more holes than there is substance. So to me, that is not logic at all, if you have to lie that much to get your point across. It's insane. But he argued that Boasberg cannot conclude the United States still has custody of the men. That is right, and they are trying to do so. If the U.S. asked for them back, Campbell said, El Salvador can say no. Right, this should be common sense. But once again, folks, Trump derangement syndrome is some kind of neurological disease where it limits any kind of logical reasoning. Right? If it involves Trump, for some reason, it's like that switch it switches to illogical, irrational, utter garbled nonsense. These people will barf all over themselves, take a dump on the floor before they will think rationally when it comes to anything Donald Trump. Yeah, I know that's a lot to do, but that's essentially what the courts are doing right now. Anytime a case involving Donald Trump comes in, it's they don't know what to do. They flip their freaking lids and lose their minds. Calling these people immigrants. A judge should know better. These people went to law school. They know how important language is when it comes to the law and comes to these rulings. These judges know how important this is. It is absolutely integral to get the wording correct in your rulings, but they don't care. They don't care about truth. They don't care about facts. They don't care about reality when it comes to Donald Trump. Once again, like I said, they would much rather take a dump on the floor, barf all over that, before they make any sort of rational judgment. It's really insane when you think about it. Think about that. Think about that for a second. When it required court hearings for those targeted by the act, the High Court also took much of the AEA case away from Boasberg, ruling that immigrants have to contest their removal in places they're being detained. Yeah, in the places they're being detained. Once again, there are no immigrants being detained. Not Boasberg's Washington, D.C. courtroom. Boasberg, who'd blocked removals nationwide initially, has held on to some of those cases, including the fate of the men who were first deported. Yeah, that is right, and that is all to that. Judge Boasberg is a lunatic, y'all. He really is. And the corporate press, all they do is get on the side of these lunatics. These people know, right? They look at polls, maybe not all the time like I do, and you guys probably do, but they look at polls from time to time. I'm sure they hear about polls. They know how much of an issue this is, how big of an issue this is. It's an 80-20 issue. This drove a lot of people to the polling booth to vote for Donald Trump. That is why Donald Trump won, mostly. It's immigration and the economy. And these judges do not care. It makes you think, it begs the question once again, why are they doing this? It makes no sense. The legality is there. Once again, we went over the law. It's all there. It's all fine. Donald Trump shouldn't have any issues getting criminal gangs out of the country, but they are stopping him. These people want the criminal gangs in the country. Once again, all you got to do is look to some of these judges that have been caught. Right? Judges aren't idiots, by the way. It's going to be hard to catch a judge, but we've already caught 2 judges, one of them assisting a wife-beating criminal, trying to sneak him out of a back door of the court so he would not get caught by ICE. How insane. That judge just threw her freaking career away and ruined her reputation. Once again, like I said, folks, when it comes to anything Donald Trump, they would much rather, or they hear Donald Trump, they immediately barf all over themselves, take a dump on the floor, and just lose any sort of rational thought. Another judge was harboring, was it Trende Aragua? His daughter was dating the guy for some reason. Like, it's alleged. I haven't confirmed that yet. I don't know if that is confirmed or not, but it's alleged. Like, these people are just nuts. And these people are judges. It's insane. But I think I've rambled on for long enough on this one, y'all. I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. Y'all don't forget to do me that favor and smash that like button for me. I really need y'all's help, y'all. Like you wouldn't believe. We got to share the video. Tell your friends, tell your family, get the word out there, because we can't have the corporate press lying to everybody. We need to know the truth. We need to know at least how we're being manipulated by these people, so we have the tools necessary to fight back when it comes time to actually fight back against this BS information, right? It's not really, it's misinformation. Right? The corporate press is dulling out nothing but misinformation all day long. And we need to stay on top of that misinformation, because we need to be armed to the teeth with reality to be able to combat their narratives, if you will. But y'all smash that like button, share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. Subscribe if you're new around here. This is all I do. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.